Welcome to the Labyrinth Lab, also known as my breakfast nook and my little artist studio. My name is Alan Cowley. I'm here with Dr. Dylan Odner and Mike Thomas, and the three of us are kickstarting a company called Golden-Thread Labyrinths. And we are putting together this video for several reasons. One of them is to help people come to understand what labyrinths are and what their uses perhaps are. What our company is going to be doing, and what we've already started doing, but then kind of what is the vision for the future. There's some of that in there that we'll want to get to. And
some basic frequently asked questions.
Yeah, that's the main thing is what questions we feel people might have, so we can get ahead of the curve on that. And we hope you are enjoying your holiday season. Today is New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
So we're here with some Danish kringle. It was a nice circle, and some coffee, some delicious coffee. So glad to have you guys here. And this is Ziggy.
Thanks for having us. This coffee is ridiculously good.
Delightful.
From Sheridan, Wyoming. So let's just jump right into what is a labyrinth and why labyrinths, Dr. Odner?
Yeah. So for me, a labyrinth is an ancient form, an archetypal form, you might say, that holds universal meaning. So that's why it's so applicable in so many different scenarios, because it's a symbol with open arms. At its simplest, it's a circle, right? So you don't need to, have studied it to know that a circle is designed to have meaning and things put into it, right? So this labyrinth is this delicate interplay between chaos and order. It's a single path. So I could just get into what is the difference between a labyrinth and a maze here as well.
That'd be great.
Right. For me, the maze, and I'm not the first person to say this, but a maze has trapdoors and little, monsters and quicksand, wrong turns at every left and right, and you have to use your logical mind to reason it through. And when you get to the end, you get a little block of cheese, and everyone's pleased with you. It's an ego trip, literally, right? So a labyrinth is the exact opposite. It is a single path, and the only choice you make is whether to take the time for it or not, right? So once you step in, you have no concerns that you won't get to the center eventually. It will take you there in a really interesting, meandering, labyrinthine path. And it's fascinating, once again, because rather than taking the quickest route from point A to point B, from the outside to the center, you're actually doing the opposite. Someone has designed a pattern that is going to take as long as possible to get you to the center. So, we'll later talk about healing and how that is a metaphor for that as well, that you need to give your unconscious self time to process, and we do so little of that in our world.
I've often thought about that also as an experience of covering all of the ground that is there and taking the time to do so, because that's what we don't do. We want that prize, that goal, that house, the whatever it is, and instead of just going, what is this life and how do we fit into it, and exploring before coming to determine what's really important, because those weird turns in the end kind of represent those things we thought were central to our life that perhaps weren't. So I find that fascinating about labyrinths. Mike, I was curious, your specialty is really in somatic healing, and could you share a little bit more about your background, and then what is the relationship between somatic healing, and the labyrinth.
Some great questions, a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the word somatic. Somatic, the root of that word is soma, from the Greek word meaning the body. And somatic means of the body, often referring to healing. And my background is in fitness, integrative psychology, and looking at how to reduce stress through nervous system regulation. So interestingly enough, as an outsider to labyrinth walking, I'm very new to this experience. And the first time I did it, I was following one of Dr. Odner's guided experiences. And as I'm doing it, I'm realizing this is limbic system therapy. Now, the obvious question is, what is limbic system therapy? It's a type of trauma healing modality, and a lot of different things fall into that category. Yoga, Tai Chi, certain types of exercise if it doesn't create more stress, if it helps you to master skills, utilize breathing. There are all these different aspects to it. But the key piece is this. Trauma results in the body going into something called the immobilization response. It shuts down awareness and movement, to be general about it. And there are a lot of symptoms that go with that, like anxiety and depression and lack of feeling. Dissociation is the technical term for it, right? And healing involves teaching the body that it's actually safe and doesn't need to go into that automatic pattern, being stuck in that immobilized response. Limbic system therapy is essentially about moving in a way that gives your body a different emotional experience. The limbic brain processes emotion. And when you give it a different meaning, a different experience, specifically that the body's safe, that it can move freely, it gives it this new message to the body that I no longer need to shut down anymore. I'm actually able to let go of that held trauma. Now, I'm drastically oversimplifying what the process of healing trauma is. However, limbic system therapy of all types, specifically labyrinth walking meditations, has this incredible capacity for healing because you're not sitting still like a lot of traditional meditation. You close your eyes and you're holding still. The body gets the message that I can't move, I shouldn't move, I should do it this certain way. Right? There's a freedom of movement and moving at the pace that you want. You can listen to the guided experiences as you're doing it, and so there's this positive emotional experience with it. So all of that is to say that when I first tried walking labyrinth meditations, I realized, oh my goodness, this is trauma healing, specifically limbic system therapy. And it's a creative way to do it. It's a
almost gamified.
Yeah, it's a gamified experience that allows you to engage in the trauma healing process. I just love it.
It's so funny to me to hear your explanation of what's going on physically, because for me, my experience is very much just in my own life, and in my head, what's going on, and that's how I try to experience things. I don't like to pre-examine or know everything about something before I enter in and explore it. So labyrinths and languages, for instance, is another thing. My old Latin teacher hated that I tried to intuit Latin and he was like, no, you're gonna have to memorize everything. But there's something I like about just trying to experience something. And when I first started walking labyrinths, and it was several years before that with Dr. Odner in a different place in Canada.
We can also cut the Dr. Odner thing.
Yeah. Hey, this is Dylan too.
Yeah.
We go way back, interestingly. All three of us have connected in past. Very labyrinthy in that way. But when I started walking them, I would notice the difference physically that I felt. Because I realized that I deal with anxiety. I didn't know that for many years, what that tightness was in my chest. Sometimes I thought like I must be cold because it feels like my whole chest pulls in, right? And it's like my stomach muscles are stuck. That's not all the time, but there are times where I'm like, what is this? And then walking in a labyrinth, even though I don't notice how much I'm holding that stress, by the time I get to the end, I'm like, I can breathe. And so the experience of that, now hearing you explain it, it's like, oh, there was a physical process that went on too. or perhaps a somatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is that what you would call a somatic experience, that release?
Yes, a somatic experience is something that's felt in the body through sensation. Could be inside the body, outside of your body with your five senses, looking at and perceiving in various ways the surrounding environment. But a somatic experience, ultimately, in the context of healing, is about a nonverbal experience. That it's your body language, right? The posture that you hold says so much about what's going on emotionally, and the way the body's preparing itself to handle whatever it thinks is going on. And I phrase it that way because the body essentially is the unconscious mind. It's the automatic processes. The autonomic nervous system is what controls those things like your heart rate, your breathing, your blood pressure, digestion, swallowing unconsciously. Breathing until you think about it is unconscious. Otherwise, we wouldn't keep on living, right? And that experience of navigating the automatic processes by listening to what the body's telling you is really the essence of healing itself. And as you pointed out, it's not something that you can really fully describe in words. It's a felt experience. And so experiencing it without knowing what the explanations are is actually an advantage, because you're not letting the cognitive ideas of what you should be experiencing getting in the way. You're just experiencing it.
Yeah.
Can I add something that just, I hadn't thought about it this way, but we all, whether you're trained in it or not, we all have somatic experiences. We all have moments, there's flow states, or, when you get into, when you forget about your conscious mind and are fully present and engaged. We all have things we do that are forms of meditation. So all these things that are, unfortunately, and not through no fault of their own, have a barrier of entry, of intimidation. Yoga, Tai Chi, all these experiences, like the labyrinth, are forms of well-worn training wheels, if you want to say, a guide to help you get there when you want to and need to. So the labyrinth is that at its simplest. What is, and I'd love to throw this to you, what is the difference between going on a nice meditative walk and walking a labyrinth? And so I'll just answer a little bit. For me, there are so many points of choice when you have to decide, am I going to keep going on this walk, or am I going to turn around? There's an inevitability, even though the walls or on a labyrinth are not true walls. Once you've made that commitment for 8 or 10 minutes to walk a labyrinth, you're going to finish it.
Yeah.
Whereas for so many of us, once you've decided to meditate, everything feels like an off-ramp. And there's something about the labyrinth that makes it easy, especially easy for uninitiated, untrained, inexperienced people that are seeking meditation or benefits of these wonderful services that come in other ways, that just guides you and keeps pulling you back, literally centering you on that. So
I've often heard people say, I'd love to meditate, but I'm just bad at it. And I definitely felt that way for a very long time, that I was just bad at meditation.
yeah.
What is the difference between a nice meditative walk and a labyrinth walk? Even with somebody like me who loves walking to the point where there's no question of, am I going to continue this walk? If I could, I would just keep walking. Like, that's more the way I can go. It's like, oh, I have to go home.
Yeah.
That's when I go.
Yeah.
And I very much do it as mindfulness walks. So I'll walk around, and when I'm doing it as a meditative walk, as opposed to just walking with my spouse, I often will try to pay very close attention to what things grab my attention in a positive way. And so I'll focus on that thing until it's either gone because I've passed it, or it goes and flies out of sight. Often it's birds will catch my attention in those ways. So it's always the environment is changing, and I'm focused on these external things, and then I think about those things, and it brings me inside. In a labyrinth walk, there are none of those environmental factors except for the direction I'm walking and the turn. And so all of the focus, I think, is reflective of internal structures, internal objects. And when I let go of what I'm seeing in my mind's eye is less real, perhaps, than what I see with my physical eyes, and go, wait a second, that's a spiritual image that I'm viewing, almost. And pay attention to it just as mindfully as I do the trees or the birds or the sounds, then it becomes something that is all internal. And that's been why I think it's different from just a meditative walk. It's the imagery is internal.
Yeah, I think very briefly that there is, like with all of these things, there is nothing discreetly different between a meditative walk. You could get all the same benefits, etc., but there is a ritual element as you approach a labyrinth that just naturally, maybe it's our most ancient ancestors, whatever it is, draws you to set an intention that we don't always do with a walk, right? You don't say, I'm going for a walk for this, right? Today, I'm going for a walk for this reason. Whereas with the labyrinth, you naturally walk up and you say, I'm going to be thinking about this person I recently lost, or I'm going to be thinking about lowering my anxiety because I can tell that it, right? Or I'm going to use this moment to just give my mind a break, my conscious mind a break.
Well, let me interrupt and actually just throw this out as a question to both you. What are some of the benefits of labyrinths in your experience, in your reading? Is there any scientific evidence that this stuff actually helps? Like, all of those are kind of related questions, but what are the benefits of meditation labyrinths?
Yeah, you want to take some first?
Sure. Well, as far as the benefits that are in the realm of healing, in the realm of lowering stress load, walking labyrinth meditations are an opportunity to focus in on senses as well as the mind. So there's this really cool meditation, sort of a side note. If anyone knows Dr. Daniel Siegel, who talks about interpersonal neurobiology, he has this meditation called the Wheel of Awareness meditation. Mm-hmm. And I bring this up because it's really valuable in terms of looking at where we can put our attention. Mm-hmm. The first quadrant is about the five senses. And you might be thinking, well, if that's just the first quadrant, what the heck is in the rest of it, right? Well, the second quadrant is about all the experiences inside the confines of your skin. So it's interoception, what you feel inside your body. And then the third quadrant is about the focusing in on the mind, thoughts, feelings, emotions, intentions, opinions, memories. These are all of the mind. It's not focusing on the sensations, the five senses, or internal sensations, or even the external environment. And then finally, you have the relational sense, the experience, which he actually quantified in interpersonal neurobiology, which was such a cool revelation to me, that you could actually quantify what has been mostly spoken about as this, this idea in contemplative practices, in Taoism, in Buddhism.
Can we just pause and say, what do you mean by quantifying it?
So you can actually measure the amount of light that goes into your eyes in terms of photons. You can measure the decibels of sound that you experience. This is perceived body language that's exchanged when we communicate with one another.
Fascinating.
Right. So the words are one way, but then there's the body language exchange. When I smile and you smile back, it's this rapport that we have that has us do that automatically without thinking about it.
Wow.
And so one of the major benefits to labyrinths, in my opinion, is that it allows us to use all of these different parts of focus. Mm-hmm. I neglected to mention one. One is he uses a spoke to point at the different quadrants. You can actually take that spoke and point it back at your own awareness. So you have awareness of awareness itself. Mm-hmm. So you have, that sort of rounds out the whole Wheel of Awareness experience, right? And in a walking labyrinth meditation, you
Yeah.
can focus on any one of those or all of those as you go through the experience. You have this guided experience of the mind with the guided experiences that Dylan puts together that you can listen to while you're walking labyrinth. And
Kind of reminds me a little bit of some of Rudolf Steiner's work on being the observer. You're no longer really a part of the environment, but being an observer of things. There's kind of a different way of appreciating and approaching the subconscious mind by doing so.
yeah, in a sense, it's a positive version, if you will, of dissociation. You're choosing to
Yes.
look from outside yourself at yourself.
Yes.
It's not something that happens automatically as a defense mechanism that your unconscious mind, your body does for you in trauma. Instead, you choose to do it, right? You can imagine you're looking down over yourself as you're walking the labyrinth and picture the bird's eye view. You can notice what's going on inside. You can use your 5 senses. You can even notice somebody else who's walking another part of the labyrinth, and there's that relational sense. And so it can be a community experience, it's a personal experience, it's a spiritual experience. There's just so much to it that, so you can sort of skim the surface with that answer, but
Can we actually return and skim it again?
Sure.
But in if you were to wrap up that 5 minutes or so, because it's obviously we're all excited about this. I don't know if you guys can tell, but when the three of us get together, we start remembering how much we love talking about labyrinths together, because there's so much, and each one of us comes from such different perspectives. I think it's fascinating to hear each of you. So you were explaining that the benefit of the labyrinth in your mind there was to access all of the quadrants of our interaction with the environment. You're able to focus from each one of those effectively from a labyrinth meditation. Is that kind of what you're...
Yeah, you're practicing all types of awareness while you're in the labyrinth, which is something I think is very unique to the labyrinth. The wheel of awareness practice is done typically seated with your eyes closed, like traditional meditation. Whereas labyrinth walking meditation, you're mobilized, you're moving, you're feeling the experience of your body moving and getting feedback and perhaps adjusting your pace, the stride that you're taking. Do you want to make it a little smaller? Do you want to quicken your pace a little bit as you're getting to perhaps an exciting part of the guided journey, right? It's interactive, which is very different from what a traditional meditation experience is like. And I'm not downing traditional meditation. I think it's wonderful. However, the experience of the labyrinth just has so much more to offer, in particular for the novice who doesn't have any training yet, or maybe doesn't want any training in meditation. You can get the benefits of meditation without having to learn and practice all of these things. You can just go right in.
Right. And we're talking about with audio guided experiences like we're talking about, but also this ancient and modern tradition. It has a built-in guide that is on that canvas or built into the stone of that labyrinth or on a handheld labyrinth. It's the grooves of that labyrinth that allow your mind to pull in. And again, you're onto something when every metaphorical term applies on a literal level too. And when it's not a throwaway that we say, oh, it's a literally centering experience or it's a literally grounding experience. There's a reason we use those terms. So it's such an interesting question, and it's really, I've been thinking how I would really answer it. For me, the labyrinth is a practice in dichotomy and the marriage of opposites. And there are so many different ways of getting at this in Eastern philosophy and in modern science and all this. But just to give a few examples, I think the epitome of wisdom, the epitome of true adulthood is, as we've talked about a little bit, the ability to hold mutually exclusive things within you and not make a rash decision one way or another, to not be the cutting knife that says this or that in daily life. The labyrinth, I already hinted at the fact that it is in some ways chaotic. You're wandering. Now I'm heading toward it. Now I'm heading away from the center. Now I'm heading left, right. I'm being whipped. You know, you could almost imagine whiplash. It's chaotic and it's order. If you look at a labyrinth like this one, your brain immediately and falsely thinks that it is symmetrical, and it's not quite symmetrical, right? We use a term like a quadrant. This one's cut into 4, but it isn't literally quadrants, because otherwise the labyrinth wouldn't work, because you have to be able to permeate those boundaries. They can't be true boundaries because you're walking in through the whole thing. So I've said this with you two a lot, but my favorite thing about the labyrinth is the diametric opposition that happens when you look at a labyrinth and your conscious mind says, oh, that labyrinth will take me 3 minutes to walk. It's tiny. It's only 15 feet across. And then the internal experience, the time that's felt, that isn't the mundane time, stretches a heck of a lot longer than that. Mm. But even the literal time, the mundane physical time, takes longer than you think it will. Your brain inaccurately makes a judgment on how long this experience will take, and the interplay between that opposition is a healthy stretch between body and mind, between soul, etc. And if I may, just one last thing is we haven't even talked about the center of a labyrinth. What is that? There's a term I'm forgetting.
The inner sanctum.
The inner sanctum is a
Yes.
term I often use. In Jungian psychology, it would be the transcendent function. There is nothing literally vertical at the center of a labyrinth, usually, and you don't want to fill that with pre-described or prescribed altars to this or that. That really distracts from it being a vessel for meaning. Mm-hmm. But whatever the metaphor you're using, if you are wanting to connect with people who have passed on to the other side of the veil, the center, we intuitively know, is where you are closest to that. There's a verticality that disrupts
like an
that.
ascension
Moment, right? And the meandering path around that, when you're moving further away, like in life, is the necessary time to prepare yourself for that transcendent moment. So not to rush right there when we are not ready for it. Joseph Campbell has a fascinating talk on mythology and schizophrenia, and says that shamanism, for instance, yoga, labyrinth walking, Tai Chi, these are all ordered, structured, guided systems that help you dip your toe into the collective waters of the unconscious, because schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, crisis are when we are not prepared for that encounter and we do not have a system, and so we try to dip our toe in and we plunge head forward into those waters unprepared. There's very little danger of that with a labyrinth because it makes sure you can't get to that center without preparing yourself.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So many thoughts that came up as you're describing this experience. One side note that came up while you were describing that in terms of the binary, right? The dichotomy between body and mind, for example, masculine and feminine parts of ourself, we might say. When we're in a high stress load, let's call it a survival mode response in your body, the mind tends to go to binaries. And I think this is a genius adaptation, because if there's a wild animal that is about to attack you, a wolf, let's say, you don't want to think about, should I run? Should I take this thing and defend myself? You don't want to think it through. You just act, right? Binaries allow us to survive, so there's a purpose in that. But it brings me to this bigger picture thought as you're describing this experience of how walking labyrinths is an integration experience. One of the metaphors that I love most about healing trauma is this idea that the event itself, and I'll just quickly clarify for viewers who may not know, there are events that are traumatic, but trauma is how the body continues to respond after the event is over. It's not the event itself. It's how the body continues to respond, and that's where healing comes in. So one of my favorite metaphors for healing trauma is this idea of the event being a catalyst for shattering your reality, your experience. You're overwhelmed. You don't have the resources to cope. And so that metaphorical shattering, you might think of it like a low-resolution TV screen of your younger self, right? And it shatters into hundreds of thousands of pieces, let's say. And the idea of healing, that happens quickly in our quick fix society is very misguided for a lot of reasons. But one reason in particular is that this experience of survival mode that we go into is very much binary, so that we can piece together and examine, like, okay, well, I don't want this to happen again, right? This traumatic experience.
Right.
And so I'll look at this black and white, this black and white. And after you do a couple of those, you start to realize, wait, this black isn't the same shade as that black. And you start to discover gray in the process, shades of gray, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to complete the metaphor, when you finally go through due diligence of processing all of these shattered pieces and put them back together, think of it like a high-definition TV screen. It's high resolution. You can see so much better. You're more resilient. You have more moving pieces. You have more awareness because of everything that was lost and you put back together through that process, that practice of taking your time to mindfully engage in it, which is a perfect metaphor for what's happening in a labyrinth walk, or the labyrinth walk is a perfect metaphor for healing trauma, you might say. It's this shift from binary, out of survival, to complexity, where you can embrace the paradox rather than having to choose this or that. It's like, how are they both complementary? How is it a yin-yang?
Yeah.
Right?
And I think you bring up a good point about combating the concept that healing is an immediate thing, that you can have a fix that just immediately just happens, but that it's such a process. And that's one of the things, the benefits that I find in walking labyrinths, is that it reminds me, the second I step onto it, is, okay, I could just walk across these lines.
Right. There's nothing
these
stopping
rocks, there's nothing really stopping me. There's nothing in my way. But if I want to do this in a way that's going to matter, I have to believe in it, and I have to take every step. And so it kind of just reminds me, even though this might be 15 minutes, or I went on a walk or a labyrinth not too far from here just last week. It was about 30 minutes to the inside and then back out.
Wow.
So quite a decent sized 100-foot across. And it reminded me very much immediately that whatever I was feeling in the moment, because I was dealing with a combination of some grief and some holiday issues, that day was just one step in many, many millions of steps in my life. And I've had many positive, great days, and I've had a lot that are darker and cloudier. But overall, that continuation towards the space of being whole, that's often what I think of, the inner sanctum
wholeness.
Being for me,
The circle.
is that wholeness. Eventually it's there. I can't exactly quantify how long it'll take for my life to get there, but that's the plan. And every step I can actually see, there are edges being taken off. There are those shatterings that we need to go through to go from low resolution, black and white shades of gray, to high resolution, active, exploring life. And that's been a lot of my process personally in life for the last year, has been kind of going away from what I had known and dedicated myself to, and moving into, there are so many parts that I had to put aside to focus so heavily on that use. And so I'm enjoying, and I think Labyrinths is a part of this, the creative side of my life coming back, being involved in design, music, things like that, I don't think would be happening if I wasn't walking Labyrinths, oddly.
No, I think it's bringing up for me he talked about there is nothing stopping you from walking straight to the center. I've recently been making my training with labyrinths more official through the Veritas facilitators training. A really wonderful experience. But I had some concerns going into it. I have a lot of training with a PhD in mythology. I have a lot of adjacent things, but I had some concerns that the modern labyrinth movement might be purist or overly serious or sacred, or overly and directly attaching to particular dogma or particular religious sects, etc. First off, I'll just say from my personal experience that wasn't the case. But the best example of that was, I got a very strong and reassuring feeling that, and these are my words, but the labyrinth is so sacred and ancient of a symbol that it doesn't need your protection for it, right? If you make that labyrinth, or if it's one that's at a local property and you've got some feeling of ownership, you don't need to be telling children not to run it and walk it in a certain way. You don't need to be. It defends itself because of its value. That's how, like deer paths through a forest, or the more souls that traverse the path, whether they are atheists or Muslim or Hindu, whatever it is, the more psychic energy that goes into it, I know I sound woo-woo, the more those paths are worn. And for these symbols and shapes, patterns of labyrinths that are truly ancient, archetypal labyrinths as they're called, it doesn't matter that of this size or that size or this particular location, the labyrinth, the ghost labyrinth underneath it, those paths are very well worn. And one just semi-related thing, I had an amazing experience a number of years ago to go on an Arthurian Legends tour through England. And I went to Stonehenge, and I had a lot of people telling me to keep my expectations low, because it's more and more gotten to the point where, for very good reasons, people just get to walk around it.
Can't go around it much. Yeah.
So I got an incredible, because I was with some PhDs and we had some wonderful privileges with that. I was allowed close to 15 minutes, more or less by myself, in bare feet in Stonehenge. And one of my favorite anecdotes was looking out from the center of Stonehenge out at the fields. You see mounds everywhere that it turns out are burial mounds. We're talking about a 5,000 plus year old structure there. Burial mounds everywhere. People just being drawn to this over the millennia and saying, I want to be buried near here. You know where there are, as far as I know, 0 burial mounds? In Stonehenge. No one had the ego. The sanctity of the wall there was enough that even with all the warlords and all the egos of history, no one said, yeah, you know where I should be when I pass? Bury me right in the center of this place. Right? No one claimed it as the center of their kingdom to just add a little weight. No one's plastered their name across it, right? I think the same is true with the labyrinth paths.
To get back to kind of the root of one of the things you were saying there about there's a level of sacredness that just like has its own protection. And I think from the Christian standpoint, there's a point where Jesus, his disciples come back and they say, hey, I've seen people doing baptisms over there and they're doing it differently than we are.
Yeah.
And he's like, whoever's not against us is with us.
Right.
Like, is for us. It's okay.
Yeah, people seeking mindfulness and
Right.
center and wholeness are doing something right.
Yes. And so I think that's the spirit of what he means there, Jesus means there, is if we're seeking what is good and useful and healing, the various ways that we approach a symbol like the labyrinth or even sacred texts, those things become vivified by what's inside of us,
Right.
more than the specific pattern on the ground.
Right. So
or the words on the page.
So Golden-Thread Labyrinths, for instance, it's a ambitious idea. None of us are claiming to have invented or to own or to hijack this ancient archetypal symbol and the value that it has in the world. We're trying to add one perhaps new angle, a new gate to the city that allows for more people to experience that.
And I think this is where I want to go with our conversation for the remainder, is focused in on, we're doing a Kickstarter campaign.
Right.
And of course, that means we're seeking funding to start a business venture. And so we have to talk about, what is that business venture? Are we just going, hey, give us $12,000
Right.
in order to talk about labyrinths?
Right.
We have other
Yes.
ideas. So what what is the vision for Golden-Thread Labyrinths? And could you talk for a couple minutes on just general vision going forward? 5 years from now, what are we doing?
Yeah. My vision for Golden-Thread Labyrinths is a venture that, through consultation and discussing with groups, that would be schools, private estates, hospitals, the works. Each of these places represent a culture, a community. They have their own mission, their own drive. The labyrinth can feed and be applied to all of those, but sometimes it needs a little bit of help, especially for less initiated people. Not everyone has labyrinth facilitators training, right? So to make labyrinths even more useful, the goal would be for us to be able to consult with groups to create canvas labyrinths, custom canvas labyrinths, custom stone, brick and mortar labyrinths eventually, handhold labyrinths, tattoo designs, wall prints, and design those labyrinths to be able to be specifically used or utilized for different purposes, okay? So some of those purposes would be from the very mundane. I've used this example before, but a winery that says, we want to have a labyrinth on our property. And we want that labyrinth to be able to tell people about the history and mythology of winemaking.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that. Or why we built a labyrinth here, a winery here in the first place. All the way to hospitals and prisons and soup kitchens that can have customized labyrinth designs and also audio experiences that help guide the walker through a particular narrative, whatever that the mission and core value of those institutions dictates.
Okay.
Love it.
Yeah.
I think each one of us brings something unique to this venture. And I love how labyrinths offer an opportunity for transformation, for healing, and for connecting to a sense of meaning and purpose. And what I'm so excited about bringing to this experience is an awareness of how to lower stress load in the body and the tension corresponding to that, so that you can, as you go through this labyrinth experience, you're in touch with what the body's communicating with you moment to moment. So whether it be at a corporate wellness seminar where, whatever your mission is, that you're focusing on, perhaps in one of the guided experiences, you can also be in touch with your body, your intuition, your capacity to go into flow state and realize an amazing idea for that company. Or in a school setting where maybe you're processing some difficult emotions that you don't perhaps have the resources outside of a counselor or whatnot, but you do have the ability to use the labyrinth to process that within. So we're channeling internal resources. And that's one of the things I find so powerful about labyrinths, is that it channels an unlimited amount of resources as we develop our internal capacity to resource ourselves and connect in community to do that. And so whatever the setting is, schools, hospitals, soup kitchens, corporations, whatever it is, there's an opportunity to go inside and increase our own capacity to give back to whatever our community is, and have a sense of meaning and purpose and contributing from the creativity that's spawned, that's inspired from that experience.
Thank you so much. And that brings us from really, we talked about benefits of walking labyrinths, but we really focused on some of those internal personal benefits. And I think what you're helping us talk about here is that there is a interpersonal benefit to labyrinths, benefits for communities, benefits for institutions, for reinstilling the values and purposes that those institutions and communities have. And so one of the concepts that we've been really working with on that Golden-Thread Labyrinths concept, what is that thread that goes through your community? What is your institution really wanting to champion? And how can we kind of embody that in a labyrinth and in the labyrinth experiences in a way that helps that institution remember and constantly remember, and even have workshops or processes that they can facilitate for themselves, or we can of course help set that up, that's our hope, that would help them reinforce those values. So one of the early ones that I put together, and whether or not it exactly represents what what was in my heart when I designed it, was one having to do with Montessori education, because they really champion the concepts of grace, courtesy, respect, and freedom in education. And so I wanted to work with a labyrinth to represent those values, those virtues, so that as an institution, the school, from the teachers or the guides as they call them, down to all of the students, the young people, will have this physical experience to remind themselves to embody those principles of grace, courtesy, and respect for one another.
It's like a practicing a kata in martial arts. It reconnects you with the purpose of what you're doing.
And the purpose of them being accessible via audio experience is so that you don't need us to be there.
Yes.
Or your local expert to be there. It's an audio guide that someone can walk in and access at any point. And in 10 minutes, hopefully, be somewhat redrawn to that golden thread. So I did want to circle back and say, there's a reason this is about golden thread labyrinths. But for me, the core idea is the golden thread. So if I'm really and truly honest, my vision for the future goes beyond golden thread labyrinths. The golden thread is that thesis, the mission, the core values of a group, community, etc. So I envision golden thread tours where we do specific customized adult tours directed at a particular mission. If you love World War II history, we could design a tour with that as the golden thread. Golden thread tours, golden thread labyrinths. I think the idea goes on and on about eventually helping with mission recentering services for corporations, for churches. Can we help you refine or clarify your golden thread through a travel experience, through labyrinths, through...
This is something I was about to bring up, even for an institution that is looking to give their customer base or their guest experience a particular experience. That's another way they can do that. If you're a hotel, you can create a labyrinth that is trying to reinforce what you guys value as a hotel. As a family establishment. It's Jamaica, and what do you want to but in that labyrinth. I don't know, but
Right. Well, but I mean,
idea.
there's the website.
yeah,
That's one way of getting, you throw your mission up there. That's one way of getting at it, at what is important to you. You sometimes, as a corporation, you give to charity to demonstrate what you care about. Another way might be to create a labyrinth or labyrinth experiences that orient others or reorient your own group to that mission, to that golden thread, and reacquaint them with that.
Now, I'm going to take a turn
Sure.
and talk about some of the vision that I've had over the last few months as we've been kind of exploring what this venture can mean for all of us. And there are parts of it in my mind. I've always been in a profession of healing people, of caring for people's souls and spirits, and that's what I'm still trying to do. Even though Labyrinth is a very different tool in that toolkit. So there are different ways that I've seen labyrinths coming up as a healing tool. And one of them will be more the traditional retreat center concept where, we can do workshops and we can have multiple different labyrinths that have different purposes, and we can lead really great retreats. That would be really cool. I think that would be an amazing place for people to spend extended time coming to know how to interact with labyrinths on their own, so that they can go back out and wherever they have their labyrinths or they have a canvas one or something, they can continue that healing process at home. So I love the idea of a retreat center eventually. But something that didn't come to me until I was dealing with it myself was drawing labyrinths. The act of actually creating these has been cathartic on a level that I've not experienced in other things. And there's something very powerful about art therapy and the way that visual arts create a safe space for healing and expression. And that often when we're dealing with our trauma, it gets squelched. And so those types of things, to be able to have art as a therapy, I think I want to develop more of how does labyrinthography actually help me.
Mm-hmm.
I know it is,
Right.
because I experience it even sometimes in more profound ways while I'm designing labyrinths than I am when I'm walking them. And perhaps it's because I'm entering into a flow state very much when I'm designing them. I'm in a flow state, but I'd love to see that transition from me getting to feel that to other people can experience that too. And we've seen some of that on our Facebook page on some people that have brought up their own labyrinth drawings and just the experience that they share of how powerful it was for them. So I think that there's something there about the drawing, the creation of labyrinths, and perhaps some processes that we can develop over time.
And this is a term we've come up with, labyrinthography. If you think of geography, that's the writing of the world, So writing of labyrinths as a practice, I hope is not brand new, but we would love to delve a little further into that, as you said, so that others can experience it, not just us, and not just the very small community of people that actually get to delve into just playfully creating labyrinths, because it is a knot. It is a Gordian knot, but in a very positive way, forcing yourself to find your way out of corners or plan ahead. That it's like that childhood game of Snake, right, where it's where it's eating the apples as it goes through, and you have to think ahead. There's something beautiful and bird's eye view about that process that is similar to cartography or map making, really art therapy, all wrapped up into one.
So one of the questions that I had in my mind for our conversation here was I had it in my mind and then it just disappeared. You gotta love when that happens.
well, you
It's like
do
I had
wanna
this
see the
whole.
comments. How are we doing?
We're at about an hour right now.
Okay.
So let me just find this question. That's what it was. So I was just thinking about, there are a lot of people who probably heard the word labyrinth. They've probably seen the movie Labyrinth. They think of mazes most likely, which we've talked a little about the difference. But if I have barely heard of a labyrinth, why should I go walk a labyrinth? Why should I even think about it? Why should I consider this company or donating to it?
Right.
Those are all kind of base level questions. If I've never walked a labyrinth, why should I? That's where it begins.
Yeah, my answer to that is anecdotal. Okay, and anecdotally, almost every person starts from that spot if they haven't experienced a labyrinth, and you kind of just have to take it for our on word value that it is something that surprises you.
Mm-hmm.
You go up expecting something, again, expecting a journey of a certain length, maybe being nervous that nothing transformative will happen, which is okay as well. Something surprising happens. Many people find that even if they were, like, I didn't even know that more or less, and I'm not trying to take ownership, I sort of guided the two of you into labyrinths, right?
Absolutely.
Years ago,
Mm-hmm.
very recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, you also experience what so many people do, which is the stumbling upon a labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
My literal first labyrinth experience was stumbling on one at my campus in California, going for a walk and saying, what is this, right? And even if it's been described to you, you're still going to have questions of what is this?
Mm-hmm.
So as backward as it is, my answer would be to quiet those concerns, those questions, and have the answer be allowed to unveil itself to you as you go to a labyrinth.
I love it.
Have any thoughts, Mike? And if not, that's completely fine. I have a couple that I can go to if you want.
No, please jump in.
One thought that I had in mind when you were speaking there was how little adults are supposed to play in the modern world, and how essential play is to our sense of safety and comfort and contentment. As children, we're allowed to play, we're told to play, and then as adults, it's all work. As odd as it sounds, a labyrinth is a very simple form of play.
It is.
It's a joke on our own brain to go, oh yeah, you think this way, and it's going to be different.
And watch what happens, right?
And so, even just thinking about that question from that standpoint, why should I go experience a labyrinth if I've never done it before? Have fun, be curious.
Mm-hmm. And I've said this anecdote before, but I have yet to see children approach a labyrinth and not want to walk it. If I also feel that that's the case in my experience with adults, but if there is a difference, we can certainly assume that's the natural fear and cynicism of adulthood getting in the way of a core human experience, which is, oh, what is this thing? That looks fun. And as long as you don't have that voice in your head saying, oh, I'm going to mess this up, I'm going to do it wrong, someone's going to say, hey, get off of this property, whatever it is, it is a playful, one of the fancy academic words for that is ludic syncretism, right? That you can allow yourself, again, it turns off that conscious mind and says, I'm giving a gift of the next 5 minutes. I'll be the cynical bastard I am for the rest of the day, but for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to give myself permission to experience this truly ancient archetypal experience as it is and however it comes to me.
Well, that brings up quite a few thoughts about play and how it relates to trauma healing, because that's a key piece to shifting the survival response. So to be brief here, imagine a traffic light corresponding to the three basic branches of the autonomic nervous system. The red light at the top is the highest level of stress, corresponds to trauma, shutdown, immobilization, non-movement. Think of it clamming up in fear. Right? The yellow level of stress is mediated by the sympathetic nervous system. So think of that as the fight or flight response. Yellow, movement oriented, could be anxiety, could be excitement, depending on if you're safe or not. The green light response, you might call it, is a specific branch of the autonomic nervous system that can be used to shift how the other ones are experienced. So if you have some red light immobilization going on, or yellow light, and as a fun side note, going between the two is referred to as the PTSD cycle, going above and below the line of overwhelm, right? The green circuit, we'll call it, it's the parasympathetic ventral vagal branch. When you activate it through play, you change how the other ones function. So the yellow light, being anxiety, turns into excitement and playfulness. The green one, so think of it, green plus yellow makes brown, actually. But forget that metaphor. Anyway, so when
Not for Ziggy.
when you combine those two circuits, it changes the survival function into something regenerative, something healing. And so think of just being blissfully immobilized. So if you practice yoga, Shavasana, corpse pose, you're just blissfully
at rest. Yeah.
That's a combination of that red light response and the green. It's helping it become non-survival based. And so playfulness is a way to achieve safety when otherwise your body wouldn't perceive that. And so it supports the healing process. And arguably is one of the most important steps in healing is making things playful, lighthearted, creative, spontaneous. I don't know what's going to happen. Let's be curious. It's a very, very helpful ingredient that counteracts that very binary, I don't want to do this, rigidity, fear, chaos that the body experiences. Playfulness transforms that into a game.
That brings up for me, I don't know how this fits in with the particular structure Q&A
I've
we're
got
talking
a few
about.
more into it.
Yeah.
But let's finish this. And
My thought is just sort of the question of why mythology? Why are so many of these these experiences we're trying to create or craft, the narratives, why do we use the mythic method? Why do we? And I think that the answer to that is that distance. If we were hired to create a labyrinth or a labyrinth audio experience for soldiers with PTSD, we are not going to write it about the apocalypse. Obviously, we're going to create as much distance from that so that people can trust that they are not going to approach too close to that trauma. They're not going to walk straight to that center. It's going to be a slow, metaphorical overlay, and we use that word a lot with what we're trying to planning for this. An overlay that says, oh, we kind of all unconsciously know that we're talking about healing, finding healing in this particular angle. Let's find a mythological narrative that we're familiar with on a human level that has some distance so that the unconscious creative mind can be using that to heal without triggering that heading up the traffic light by getting too close to home.
One of the things that's interesting to study is to look at the perception of mental health over the last century or many centuries really, but how much right now we're just dipping a toe in what it's like to just be accepting of our mental conditions are various all the time. And mental health is something that isn't a scary thing to say, I'm having a hard time. It's just like we have a physical body that gets illnesses and needs healing and it needs treatments. We're now in an era, I think, where the healing arts and the healing sciences are both there. and both can be spoken about without ridicule,
Mhm.
or it's woo woo to some
Yeah.
people might, but there's enough of a groundswell of everybody kind of going, yeah, there's something more than just this physical experience. We've got this consciousness thing that we can't quantify in the same way, and yet it's so real that
Yeah.
we see the evidence all the time. So I think there's something very powerful about the timing of the modern labyrinth movement right now, and what can come of the healing arts.
Right.
And this is scientific in a way, because as odd as it sounds, labyrinthography is very much math.
Yeah.
It's drawing with circles and angles and curves, and the aesthetic is beautiful. So it's art too, but it's very much a math based art.
Yeah.
So I think there's something really cool about how labyrinths do both. It's both an art and a science, and it's deep soul level stuff.
Just as it is playful, it's ludic, and it's serious healing. Just as it is, a soul, mind, body. It's just so multifaceted.
So I feel like we've had a really good discussion on some of the long-term vision and some of our philosophy on why we are looking at those things, and what the effects of labyrinths have had on us and why those things are meaningful.
Yeah.
To get to the mundane, to the present moment, this little path of the labyrinth that we're walking right now, which is the Kickstarter, it's building up funds to start this venture. What will that funding go to specifically, and how is it going to help us on that journey?
Right. So there are a number of answers to that. In simplest terms, we want to create a website, not a fancy, breathtaking website, but a website that serves a purpose. And that purpose is the ability to create a Golden-Threads location so that when you scan a QR code at this or that institution that is right on that sign as you enter the labyrinth, it will bring up whatever 4 or 5 audio guided experiences.
And these audio guided experiences, we'll talk more about them, but they're just simple audio meditations that are built for the length approximately of the walk.
Yep. And narratively overlaid on it. But you're exactly right. Scanning it, and then you would have a few options. Do I want to make this walk for stress reduction? If it's at a school, do I want to take this test anxiety meditation as I walk the labyrinth? Am I at a wellness center, and do I want to deal with some serious grief? And do I want to take this odyssey journey of healing? So the literal ability to select that audio and have it be able to play in our headphones while we turn our phones off, so that we can put that phone away and walk immersed in the labyrinth. That is an actual technological difficulty that we need to find a way to successfully do. We have a bootstrap version of that solution for that right now. We want a more elegant solution. So we want to design a website with some widgets that do just that.
A very functional website.
Functional website. We want to, a big part of this is going to be fulfillment, and fulfillment of the rewards you're seeing as you are on Kickstarter. The positive of that is this is not just us wasting time and money fulfilling. It's the beginning of our business. It's our first examples of how to get labyrinths to people, right? And get people to labyrinths. So that is not a loss in our book. We're gathering people who have shown an interest in what we're doing. So your email addresses, your as potential future clients, and we may be collecting some literal first round clients as well on some higher levels as well. So that's a big part of it. The last one is mostly Alan's territory. He's got the core of this, which would be the paying for the materials, quite expensive materials, to create our first set of canvas labyrinths, custom labyrinths that we hand paint, hand design for different purposes, and hand paint onto canvases for anywhere from 15 feet across all the way up to maybe 30 feet across.
Yeah. And when we say canvas, it's not actually a canvas material. It's a very, very long-lasting, durable material that we're using. Outdoor friendly, and so it's very versatile, and I think it's going to be very long-lasting. And so I think we've got a great we've got a great design and a great plan for this. And so the canvas labyrinths, I think, is going to be one of the ways that we can most directly make the labyrinth more accessible to more people, and to share with people, not just by us telling you, but by you get to walk.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that part of it, I'm pretty excited about. The challenge, first of all, of painting these massive canvases.
It's quite something
fun.
to see. Yeah. And we'll be sure to, in some ways, have that involved in our rewards, right?
Yeah.
You're going to want to see behind the veil, the design process, the painting process. One final thing I would say is that this really and truly, the funding is also a proof of concept. We believe in this. We want to see the evidence of what we truly already believe, which is that there is a niche for this, there is a need for this, and a lot of those choices become easier when you have, it's not just the dollars, it's people investing time and energy and love into spreading this message, spreading this venture. That tells us that we're on to something, as we believe we are.
Absolutely. It's also a community builder, this Kickstarter, because every level of donation involves a service that we offer you. So there's an opportunity to get Labyrinth stickers that Alan's been designing. There's an opportunity to work with me on stress reduction or various other somatic experiencing type of services that I offer. They're building labyrinths at higher levels of donation. So you can get a customized labyrinth. I mean, there's a lot of connecting to what we do in a very real way. By contributing, we give back in that process so that we can make it more interactive and build this community together.
Yeah, it is a Kickstarter, and that means we're not kickstarting in order to start. It's getting us a head start, a further, an advanced leg up on this, so that those decisions later are easier. There are some things like we aren't an official company, right? There are some simple legal steps, and once the proof is in the pudding, once we have the will of the people behind us, it's going to make it pretty easy to take those next steps. And again, not just the dollars, but the momentum to say, now it's time to incorporate, or now it's time to, and that sounds too fancy, but I just mean there are some check boxes that need to be, that funding helps make a reality.
Just in terms of starting to wrap some of this up and thinking about what are some of our goals for this video, which is to help answer some questions, but also I just would like to express our hope, more than trying to drum up donations to make this successful, is to spread the awareness of this wonderful healing tool. And that's the point of the money too, but sharing this is really what we're hoping for, not just this content, but what we're trying to do. We do believe in, and we hope that others will get to at least come across it, stumble upon the labyrinth, as we said, to find that there's something there. Because I think a lot of people just won't know until they try.
Right.
And so my hope is to spread a feeling of curiosity about the labyrinth and a little bit more willingness to try it out, and not just think, oh, it's crop circles in a field. No, there's something else to it, or else there wouldn't be around for so many thousands of years.
Yeah, and yes, this metaphor of joining the golden thread with us, it may sound cliche, but we are each, picture a mini labyrinth that is each of us, a Venn diagram. If you can't contribute, you really are contributing just as real of a way. If you take this message, if you find it important, if it resonates with you, and you say, I'm going to share it on this platform or with this community, or I'm going to email it to my friend, or I'm going to text my friend and say, I thought this was interesting. Check out the video. Doesn't have to be more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Are there anything last second that you'd like to throw in there, or are we ready to wrap it up?
This feels like it's
Feels like a
wrapped
good
with a bow.
wrapped up place. I feel like we've kind of wrapped into a little space of inner sanctum.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this was a whole conversation, which was exciting.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll have another one in the
Absolutely.
future. The Golden Threads podcast. There's a future vision too.
I forgot to even mention that one. Yeah, that would be really cool. I also just think the well runs really deep. So we have to trust that an equally fascinating conversation would happen.
So on behalf of Dylan and Mike and Alan, we're Golden Threads, and we do hope you share, get curious about the labyrinth, and if you're able and willing, donate.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Cheers.
Wonderful.